All right, we hear
Been
you.
watching
We
all
hear you
morning,
nice.
but I didn't feel like getting on camera yet. It's now 8:30 a.m.
Yep. Well, it is. It is time now. I think we generally ask not to be on camera unless you're speaking, just because it chews
Yeah,
up people's
just
bandwidth.
wanted to
But
say hi.
thanks for popping in and saying hi.
Hi,
Good to
Lisa.
see you. All right. Hello, Mike. We'll get to you very soon, I believe. You're doing quite a lot of the talking at this one. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to CALEXT at IETF 121 Dublin, where it is daytime for some people. So, as with all IETF sessions, everything you do here has some rules that you have to follow about the processes and policies of the IETF. If you have not read these, please go and read them all, and then suggest updates to them at the plenary tomorrow. There's discussion. Anyway, if you're at all dispatch, there are plans to update some of these things to match reality. But for now, these are the rules. And likewise, we expect people to be well behaved here and kind to each other. And yes, I know, right? Something like that. Except for people wearing hats. There's no rules about people wearing hats. Yeah. I'm auditioning for the role of Barry, as you can see. Look, if you've got hair, you don't need to wear hats. You know how it works. Don't do that, I think, is basically the rule. Let's move on. There's meeting tips, instructions here about things. If you have been sitting in this room for the last few hours through lots of meetings and have not logged back into the tool, please do log into the tool. Remote people, you're automatically logged into the tool. You've already probably worked this out. Oh, good, my screen has not updated to the slides that are showing, but thankfully the slides themselves are showing. So this is our agenda. Does anybody have anything they want to update, change here before we get on with this agenda? It's a fairly light agenda, so I expect we may finish early. All right. Yes? All right. Good luck. My browser has actually crashed. So, there we go.
Robert Stepanek speaking. So I'm not sure if I uploaded slides for a proposal for a new internet draft in the CALEXT working group. Is that something we are going to discuss shortly in the AUB part of the agenda? Okay.
Just be a little bit closer to the mic.
He says okay. All right. Then fingers crossed I'll be able to share the next slides and then pass over to Mike. So, Mike, if you request slide access, I can grant them to you, or I can.
No, I'll just ask you to move. And that's for the third agenda item. We haven't got any slides for the first two. The first two are tasks and subscription upgrade.
Yep.
I don't know there's much to say about either of those. I think they're both complete. Robert raised some issue about percent complete in participant, and I have a version. I just checked that my change was adequate, and he seemed to think it was. So I'll resubmit the draft in a short while. But I think we're done. I mean, Ken took a look through it. Is that right?
Ken is nodding.
So I think both of those are essentially good to go. I'll need to, as I say, I'll need to resubmit the task with a minor change.
But, the subscription upgrade got pulled after it had already been sent to IESG. We're happy that those things are now fixed.
I can have a last check. I'm down at my daughters at the moment. I'll check in the next couple of days that everything seems to have been dealt with, and if not, I'll resubmit with some fixes and post something on the list.
All right. I think given how long it is since the last one, I'll do a new working group last call on those updated
Probably
documents for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, probably a good idea. I'll as I say, I'll check through any if there are any open issues with either of them, and then try and do that this week.
Great, thank you. All right, on to ITIP with participants.
Yeah, if you want to go to the next slide. Yeah, so when we originally fixed up a specified VPOL, I guess I could put my camera on, not anonymous here. When we first defined VPOL, we had components for the voters, and we really needed components because you pack votes and all sorts of other information inside.
Don't say that.
Sorry?
It's okay. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
That's a
fine.
bad joke. Very poorly timed.
That's good. So and of course it sort of dragged on a bit, and then participant came along, and it obviously made a lot of sense just to get rid of the voter component and replace it with a participant component, because that's exactly what it is. It's a participant with essentially a voter role, and that had already taken the place of attendees. We didn't have attendees in the VPOL component. We had voters, and so we changed those to participants. So it made sense to go the whole way and get rid of the organizer as well, because that's just another role for a participant. Mm-hmm. And having done that, I realized we really hadn't specified how you do scheduling with a VPOL component, which essentially is how do you use scheduling using participants. So this draft, which is it really just specifies how you do that. There's no real change to ITIP. It's just the representation essentially is different. We're using participants instead of attendees, and it's a pretty simple mapping. It required the definition of a bunch of properties, but the other motivation, as I mentioned here, is that JS Calendar also uses participants. It doesn't use it doesn't have an attendee property particularly. It has participants in this same way. So this sort of lays the ground for doing scheduling using JS Calendar objects. It doesn't actually say anything about JS Calendar because I think it would just confuse the issue. I did start off trying that, but it didn't work very well. So can we move on to the next slide? I can't tell what I said.
Yep.
Yeah, here's what's specified. It's the mapping. It's so it's a mapping from attendee and organizer properties to participant. It defines which roles to use. I think it clarifies how some of the roles are used in participant, because it's not absolutely clear in JS Calendar or anything else, but the owner takes the place of the organizer. There's no attempt to deal with the idea of having multiple owners for a scheduling entity, though that issue's been raised a number of times, that it makes more sense in some cases to have multiple owners, but that I think is something that we have to do as an extension. And so the main work is mapping the parameters in attendee and organizer onto either existing properties like DT stamp and things, or onto new properties to hold things like, participation status and things. Many of those properties already existed in a JS Calendar sense, so I was sort of doing a bit of a reverse mapping there, trying to bring things into line. Next one along. as I say, there's no attempt to change ITIP in any way. And it's a statement that existing entities like, vEvent and V2Do and all the rest of it, they must use organizer and attendee, not trying to encourage people to move towards participant. I think we had some thoughts on perhaps tightening up the statement that's in the event publication spec. But we can probably deal with that on the list later, and maybe some slight changes. I think we talked about how do you know which of the properties you're, one of the suggestions was that you could actually use the participant as well as an attendee in the event to add extra data about the participant, and that leads you into a problem of how do you sort of keep those things in sync. And I think Robert had some thoughts on that we might want to tighten up this statement. I think that we're sort of moving towards that the participant must be a complete specification of the attendee if you're going to do that. But that's not really a change to ITIP. Next slide. I was just struggling to find slides, but basically, I guess this is just the ordering. VPOL would depend on this. The JS counter, I counter mapping can also use this. So we probably want to at least push this slightly ahead of those two so they can actually have references to this draft. And it doesn't have to become a spec any faster, just at the same time. And last slide, maybe.
Yep.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. So I already have an implementation of this. It's most of my work when I was implementing this was actually undoing and the stuff that I've done when we did all the testing with VPOL and redoing it properly. It's not that hard to implement scheduling with participants instead of the attendee and organizer, and there's I have a version of iCal4j which I forked long ago, and I occasionally push stuff back to Ben, which has all those properties. And so if anybody in the Java world, there's already a library they could use which supports this. And that's that.
Cool, thank you. So the status of this, is this draft
It's not been adopted by
ready for adoption?
I think so. Ken and Robert may have opinions on that because they've both seen it. It
Right.
probably makes more sense to do that because then we can start. I know that we had some changes we made. They're not noted anywhere, but I think it's at a point where we could have some open discussion on it. Yeah.
Yeah, Robert, do you want to?
Robert Stepanek again. So I'm very much in favor of adopting this. It's going to be very useful also for the JS calendar work that we are doing. While I'm standing here, getting back to the comment from Mike previously about how to keep data between the participant component and the attendee parameters in sync. We had discussed this like off the mailing list a bit. I don't have a good answer for that. I think it's very critical that we find a good answer, and I guess it should also be part of this RFC. And we are also going to implement this in the Cyrus implementation. So we will have one more data point to make a good decision on how to deal with potentially the participant component scheduling data and the attendee scheduling data getting out of sync.
Cool. Is this document already in Data Tracker?
Yes.
Yeah,
as
okay.
Draft Douglas, whatever. And I could, if we do adopt, I can resubmit it fairly quickly as a CALEXT document.
All right, great. Then I will do a call for adoption for the document as it is now, and obviously it'll get revisions afterwards.
Yeah.
Just a question. Is it some work and discussion that we think can be, I mean, can we find a good answer by the end of the year, or is it, should we plan the year ahead?
I mean, it's not really it's really just a statement of, for those of us who implemented vPole, this is pretty much just a specification of how we did it, with some slight variations. I don't think it needs to take a long time, because it's really a guide for how you should implement it if you want to say schedule vPole. So, and as it doesn't make any changes to ITIP in any real sense, I don't think this is going to take very long. If people are agreed that it's fine, then it's really driven by wanting to get vPole and the JS calendar iCalendar mapping moving along. It doesn't have to be any faster than those, but it can't be any slower than those.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So we could target to have that ready by the end of the year.
I think so. Yeah, it'd be nice
Okay.
to get it out before the other two, so we don't have.
Yeah, that's
But you know, it's not critical that we do, but it's just a nice to do. And I know they say there's no significant issues with it as far as I can see. I mean, it's not intended to be. It's intended to be an exact. You know, it's just ITIP.
yeah.
With it.
Cool. I'll send the call for adoption straight after this meeting.
Great.
All right. Next up, we have before we go on, anything else? Anyone else want to make any comments on that draft on adoption? No. JS calendar, iCalendar, or JS contact profiles. Which one of them are we doing first? JS calendar, iCalendar. Then let's go. Hey.
So test seems to work.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to talk about the JS Calendar iCalendar RFC, which is about conversion between JS Calendar and iCalendar. Next slide, please. We had started, Mike and I and Joris Baum, we had started working on this quite a while ago. The draft expired because of other work we were doing. Mainly, I was tied up with JS contact work, and Mike and Joris also had other RFCs to work on. We now resurrected the JS Calendar iCalendar draft. We also marked the other two RFC documents that we had created in the first iteration as that. The one was about adding new iCalendar properties, I think. The other one was adding new JS. Or the other one was JS Calendar BIS, which we are not pursuing anymore. We also changed the status from standard to experimental. I will get back to that. And the scope of the document now is that to cover all IANA registered JS calendar and iCalendar elements, in the sense that we define if and how to convert them to the other format. Doing that, I started implementing it in libical, although it's at the moment it's not in a state where I could upstream it to the libical library. Getting back to the experimental status, the question is, when would that experiment be successful? I'm not sure if I have a good answer for that already, but I would deem it a success if it shows that the iCalendar data that gets generated out from JS Calendar is processed correctly by iCalendar implementations. They do not necessarily need to support all of the newly added components that were part of the iCalendar updates in the last 1 or 2 weeks, as defined mainly by Mike. But they shouldn't reject that data. So that's one of the experiments. I think another experiment would be to have at least 2 different implementations and make sure that the data that we produce, the converted data that we produce in one implementation and hand that over to the other implementation produces the same output from the original input. But we can, I think we can decide more on this while we are working on the document. Next slide, please. So I already said we are going to cover all IANA registered elements. To make this more specific, it's going to be all of the iCalendar RFCs that are already published, plus the ongoing iCal tasks and IT participants drafts. I'm happy that the IT participants draft is hopefully going to be adopted soon. For JS Calendar, we are covering the JS Calendar RFC plus the plus a few things from JMap calendars, mainly the calendar user address property. The goal of this RFC is, or this internet draft is to define how to convert between the 2 formats and preserve all the information that is available in either. So conversion should be lossless, but that does not, but it's not a goal that we define standard elements should they be missing in one or the other format. So we will use kind of catch-all properties that allow to preserve the data, but is not going to be necessarily processed by client or by implementations that are not aware of the other format that was preserved. The working group charter at the moment says that there must be a representation in both formats for extensions to either iCalendar or JS Calendar, and define a robust mapping between them. So the internet draft I'm currently talking about is actually a good reality check to see how well we are meeting this requirement. Next slide, please. So don't get hung up on the exact numbers, but what you're seeing here is a comparison how well or how much of the properties in an iCalendar component can we convert to standard elements in JS Calendar, and the other way, how many of the properties in a JS Calendar type can we map back to iCalendar. Sorry. I think we're doing quite okay. Obviously we are not meeting the charter. The 2 components that that might get highlighted here is the participant component in iCalendar, where we are actually not covering, we are actually covering almost only half of the properties. And let me be clear, when I talk about the properties in a component, I mean these are the properties that are explicitly mentioned in their iCalendar ABNF definition to occur in that component. In iCalendar, any property can basically occur anywhere, but these are the ones where the authors of these components expected these properties to show up one way or the other. The one thing is participant. I think that I will need to check with Mike how we best deal with that. You can also see that the participant from JS Calendar isn't really covering all of what we have available in iCalendar. I think that the draft that Mike just presented previously is going to close a lot of the gaps for JS Calendar to iCalendar conversion. The other thing that sticks out here is alarms. JS Calendar alerts are a subset of the features available in vAlarms. That's on purpose. But that also means that when converting alerts, quite some information gets lost in the sense that it's not available anymore, except in some conversion-specific properties. I will get back to this also on later slides. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, one more thing. You see here, and that's clickable if you have the PDF, the Appendix A in the current version of the document lists explicitly all properties that are not convertible in either format. All right, next slide, please. As I said previously, we do not plan to define standard elements in either format unless, and this is the change, this is the exception from the rule, unless it's necessary to schedule calendaring data. And for this, I think we are missing at the moment in JS Calendar properties to preserve the scheduling related parameters on an organizer. As we said previously, it's quite fuzzy in both iCalendar and JS Calendar if the owner of an event, where there can be multiple owners, is really the organizer or not. In the current ITIP scheduling semantics. So I think we really want to have very explicit properties in JS Calendar for that, and that's my proposal. Next slide, please. While we are at it, there are a couple of other simple properties that I think we should introduce to JS Calendar. First is the timestamp to mark a task as completed. We are missing that currently. UIDs are defined in the iCalendar components for alarms, for example. And for alarms, there's especially important because that's how you snooze an alert, by relating it to another alert. So we should preserve them in standard elements. The link object type in JS Calendar has a title property, but if you look at the definition of the title property, it's not really a file name. So we should introduce a file name property, I think, to a link to preserve the semantics of an file name parameter on an attachment. Similar argument for the schema property. And the additional change I want to make is that with the participant component in iCalendar, one can now have multiple vLocation components inside that participant, whereas in JS Calendar, we at the moment only allow a participant object to refer to one and exactly one location in the overall event location. So that's useful, but it's not the same thing. So I suggest we also introduce a locations property for the participant. Next slide, please. There's one property I think we really should update in JS Calendar, and that's the rel property of a link. We restrict that in JS Calendar to only allow relation types registered at IANA, whereas its iCalendar equivalent supports all different rel types as defined in RFC 8288, and that means that they can also be arbitrary URI. I think it makes sense to do that. Next slide, please. Last slide regarding the differences that have shown up so far during the conversion is in iCalendar, we have vAlarms with proximity. We recently talked about how that makes sense for a calendar event. I'm still not sure how it would, but for a task, it could be very interesting to have a proximity alert. We are missing that in JS Calendar. I think we might want to think of doing that, but that's too many semantics to define and shouldn't be part of the conversion document. Similarly, a vCalendar can have a refresh interval. I think that could be a useful property also for JS Calendar group, but again, the semantics should get hashed out better, and that is out of scope of the current draft. Last but not least, there is a language parameter in iCalendar, but that's something different to a localization. So both JS Calendar localizations and language parameters in iCalendar are doing similar but different things. Yeah, the other things I think might be interesting to add to iCalendar would be the send by semantics of JS Calendar, and the other reply to intent to schedule methods than IMIP, but again, that needs more definition than we can cover in a conversion document. Next slide, please. I think that's the last slide. And as I said, we can now do the reality check. How well do our RFCs currently meet the charter? I think they are somewhat meeting the charter, but they clearly do not living up to the requirements we set out. I think we should loosen the language in the charter. We should not do a must, but we should do a should include a representation in both formats and define a robust mapping between them. Next slide, but I think that was the last one anyway. Oh, no, there are next steps. Next step is to finish the conversion document, finish its implementation, then start the experiment, so to say. And if at least what's the first two bullets are, that might be already be done at IETF 122. All right, thank you.
All right. I guess time for some questions. We'll probably have to talk with our area director about what chartering would involve and whether that's a sane thing to do. And also, I've got some questions around whether we want to publish an experimental RFC or whether we just want to have a draft that we ask people to implement and then publish a standards track. I'm not sure which of them is a better pathway, so I'm looking for comments on that as well.
Just saying one more thing to that. The other question is with an experimental draft, by the way we defined the JS calendar IANA registry, we could register new properties, but it might feel kind of awkward that an experimental draft registered new stuff at IANA.
Well, one comment. Please go.
Hi, I'm Joris from Modriga. So I just wanted to reiterate here, I think we have talked about this before, but this document defines a bunch of new properties for the JS calendar task and event objects, for example. This draft, as I understood, should only include properties that are coming out of a background of conversion, right? It should not include any additional things that we see. That just to clarify the scope of the document.
Yes, that's the scope.
Okay.
All right.
Hi, Horace Steele, responsible area director. Happy to have a conversation around changes you want to discuss regarding the charter. I just want to understand. I think the last person who spoke kind of answered part of my question, but in these tables where we're showing like 50% in the worst case compliance to the charter, which hurts me to say, but that's only on, you have a data model in one format here, and you've got a different format over here, and you're mapping between them, and so it's 50% sort of loss in data modeling parameters between the two of them, and the charter says that there's supposed to be a one-to-one mapping. I just want to make sure I've understood the.
Yes, that sums it up.
Okay, and I saw in the room here some sort of interest in relaxing that charter constraint, but in the context of these two specifications, relaxing wouldn't that just mean that you couldn't have any, you would have even less reliability, that if you could do something in one data model, you'd be able to do something similar in the other data model?
So for the as far as I've seen while working on these conversion rules, I do not see this as a concern. So where I see a clear gap that's critical to preserve information, I propose to add them, and that's especially around scheduling. For the rest, it for the rest it's really only relevant once once services would, for example, want to serve calendar data over CalDev in both JS Calendar or iCalendar, so like using the accept header or whatnot. I just do not see this happening anytime soon. So I think that the relation between JS Calendar and iCalendar more likely is going to be JS Calendar going to be used in JMap for calendars, um, and then of course the ton of calendaring services out there using CalDev, and the interaction point will be ITIP. So basically scheduling data, and that's already quite a restricted set of properties in terms of what's scheduling related. And as long as we cover these, I think we're good. But yeah.
Okay. And then just to the point about experimental documents, I'm a big fan in supporting experimental documents, but if we're going to do them, we want to make sure we've described what the success look like for the
Yes.
experiment. And I would want to see, what kind of criteria is the group looking for to sort of establish that this is no longer an experiment and this is ready to be a proposed standard. And sort of thinking about that up front, in the design of your experimental documents is really good. And then in terms of the registry impact, and I have to go back and take a look at the registration policies, but we obviously don't want to be burning a bunch of points in the registry with experimental stuff. So I'm happy to take a look at that. And it sounds like maybe there's a sort of longer conversation around the charter structuring that you want to have. I think that's great. I'll have to take a look at is any of this on the list? Like, can I go back and get any kind of archive on this, or are we just starting?
No, I think we're just starting.
We're starting here. Okay, good. Well, then I want to see the discussion go to the list. I want to hear from the broader stakeholders, folks who aren't in the room. But here to support you. And thank you.
Okay, cool. I can start the discussion on the list by proposing what I would see as experiment success criteria, and then we can go from them.
And one more thing, Bron, I don't want to step on your toes at all throughout this. So if you want to have a chat first before we take anything to the list, I'm happy to.
No, this sounds good to me. Regarding putting things in the registry, I'd want to at least reserve them in the registry so no one comes and stomps on them afterwards, but I think that's fine.
Okay.
People aren't going to be putting the registry outside of this process. So long as we let Iana know this, I'm happy. The real difference is whether we publish with an RFC number or whether we just remain in draft until we're happy with the experiment completed. It sounds like, Ori, you're leaning towards publish with an RFC number and then change the status or publish a BIS depending how the experiment goes.
So the reason to publish an experimental RFC would be that we need people to implement this and we need to gain experience. And, the conclusion could be this was a terrible idea, right? And it could be that, you publish the experimental RFC, you have an idea of what success would look like. You never hit that threshold. And then you haven't published a proposed standard that never hit that adoption point, that implementation threshold. So it sort of protects you from having that outcome and having implementers have to deal with that kind of scenario. For what we're doing here, I'm still kind of trying to wrap my head around what's the right approach. It could be that, like you say, this should just be a draft until you have multiple independent implementations. You use the BCP 205 implementation status report piece at the bottom. You get really solid evidence that this is good and we're ready to go, and then you get proposed standard RFC.
Yeah, I'm open for either. It does not need to be experimental. It can just be a long-living draft, so to say. I think that the decision might also depend on if people are more likely to participate in the experiment on the draft, or if they would want to see an RFC number they can refer to.
That sounds like something to ask on the list as well.
Yeah.
Unless someone says that they want an RFC number, it's probably not worth the round trip, I would say, of getting the RFC editors to do a ton of work on it. Just say we bless this version of the draft as the one we're going to interop test on.
Sounds good
I
to me
think
too.
sounds sufficient. Regarding changing the charter, I don't see a big benefit in rechartering. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like a lot of the things when we say we're only 70% compliant are the rarely used or unused components of the iCalendar. Yes, they're there, but no one's really using them or using them for things that matter in an interop purpose. So
Yeah,
it's probably not as bad as the numbers.
It goes in that direction, certainly. It's also a question how the working group interprets the robust mapping. So if the robust mapping includes like these conversion specific preservation of properties, if
Yep.
that's robust enough, then we are good. Yeah.
All right, there's a bit of a queue. So Mike.
Just a couple of things. As I mentioned briefly when I did the IETF participant spec, and I started off trying to include JS Calendar in it, it makes for a very messy document. So that's maybe something we need to think about is when we say you should include a JS Calendar definition. Maybe we should have a separate document for each with the mapping and things. And also, I think what we're sort of moving towards is it may be worth rechartering a bit. Really, I think we should be concentrating on the core specifications and not worry at this stage about anything else, because until we get IETF working with JS Calendar, it's really not going to have much of an adoption, is it? And that really is the core.
Not for scheduling work, yeah.
And the other things, I think I'm a little wary about experimental status. I mean, how do we persuade people to put some work into something and then just wave our arms around and say, well, it's just experimental? We should at least try and preserve the appearance of being this is something that's really going to be a standard spec.
Yes, I would be very happy to make this standard track. I think for that I would prefer to at least see 2 robust implementations that are able to incorporate based on that idea.
Yeah, I guess I have a nearly robust implementation of part
great.
of it. But again, being able to concentrate on the core. And as for future documents, it becomes progressively easier because a lot of them are just how you use existing properties to do something. So I think it becomes easier as time goes on.
All right, Ben.
Hi, this is Ben. Quick comment on the properties. What makes people miss a meeting is start time, location, summary, description. These are the ones that you really, really want to be sure that you get them right. Otherwise, people miss meetings, and then including the recurrence rules, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And time zone, which are both awful. A very specific question. I'm not sure if this is the right forum. Feel free to shut me down. I read through the spec. We had in the past IETF a short discussion about HTML in there. And that's a little bit messy there. I see that you're using the styles description property, which is defined in another RFC as an extension to iCalendar. Having implemented that in Thunderbird, the experience is that backwards compatibility is a big problem here because the description and the HTML description must stay in sync. So the problem that you have is that the client doesn't know about styles description because I haven't seen anybody implementing that. There might be some, but Google definitely doesn't. Microsoft definitely doesn't. Thunderbird doesn't. If Nextcloud doesn't. If they don't know about this, they change the description, and the HTML description, the style description stays the same. So a client shows that style description has an outdated information. So there needs to be some mechanism to either detect that or make sure that clients that are not aware of it invalidate that. This is why Thunderbird is using a property on, no, how is it called? A parameter on the property, sorry, which then is more easy to invalidate because it's a property, a parameter on the description property. So if you rewrite the description, it's more obvious to also drop this parameter, which halfway takes care of that if the client is implemented this way. This is not really part of your specification here, but it comes into play because if the documents are being converted to exactly that format, then you have to deal with the consequences of that.
Yep. Thanks for addressing your points. The first, so this basic calendaring data that's really core for calendar information that's covered completely both in iCalendar and JS Calendar. So there I have no concern. With regards to the rich text descriptions in JS Calendar, the issue you have been outlining is not an issue because you still only have one description, but it might not be plain text. So it only becomes when you convert that to iCalendar the issue, the question of also generating a plain text rendering from that description. So the gaps between description and style description, I think that's as you said, is not part of the conversion internet draft. So Mike might want to chime in. That being said, I see the issue. We might need to have more practical experience how well the derived parameter is handled by implementations, because the issue we had been pointing out would be that you basically set the derived parameter to true on all properties, but the one which contains the latest and best version of the description.
That, right?
Yeah. If a client is unaware of that, the only question is if it would preserve the derived equals true parameter, or though it changes the complete description. And I think it's a bit fuzzy in the iCalendar definitions. If a client changes the property value, should it like remove all the parameters or not? So there might be an issue. I agree with you, but that's something that needs to be looked in iCalendar.
So there's three, from what I'm understanding, there are three different proposals having two different properties here, having two different properties and a derived parameter on one of those. And then the third way to potentially solve that is to put a hash on, or to copy the plain text description on the HTML description, so that I know if they don't match anymore, then I detect that there is a problem. That would be one more way to do that. I think that would be the most stable. If you say style description equals this, and I put a parameter on that which copies the plain text description, and if they're not in sync, then.
I think it's a discussion we should be having. I would prefer not to be having as part of this ID, but I think it's something we should figure out in the working group.
Just briefly, I'll mention that that specification was drawn up with the cooperation of Google. They actually got in on some meetings, and the end result was more or less what they came up with. There's so I think, like a lot of things, it's a matter of trying to persuade vendors to implement, and then I guess we'll find the issues with them, and if they really are important issues, rather than redesigning.
Right, Neil.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much, so I just wanted to lend my voice again to the fact that the ones that are not mapping at the moment is because mostly they are just completely irrelevant, not important, unused on the whole, and things like, with the alert, which only had 50%, is because there's a bunch of properties which everyone then ignores because they don't want you to be able to arbitrarily do shit with alerts. So we shouldn't be spending vast amounts of time trying to get this one-to-one compatibility. It's not a good use of our time. And yeah, generally there was kind of a reason in the first place. And part of it is wanting to evolve to a slightly better data model anyway than we had for my calendar.
All right, Daniel, you're next in the queue.
Yeah, so regarding restructuring, I think we're robust enough. We do have a robust binding. It doesn't mean 200%, but I think that's fine. And the reason I'm willing to avoid this recharting step is that I think it's going to distract the working group with the process works as opposed to the core work that we need. So I'd like to avoid that step. Then regarding standard versus experimental, I think it really depends on the calendar community, but I tend to think that so I'm coming with a different background with operators and so on. So if you have something experimental, it really means, no one is going to take time to implement it. So, but it doesn't change after. The content doesn't change. But yeah, I tend we need to be careful how this is not how we. What is the right way? It's more the right way is how people are going to interpret that label. But for me, I don't care. But just be cautious that if you take experimental, it's going to be the first argument to say, oh yeah, let's wait a standard. And when you say standard, it's not, you can see a lot of the standard document that's just being written again. So there are multiple versions. So standard is always proposed standard until it has 20 years old experience, and then it might become a standard, but very little people do that. So just 2 comments. Thank you.
Shortly adding to that. So the point of proposing experimental was that I thought it might incentivize people to implement the draft rather than just implementing a work in progress draft. But if that's not how people read experimental status, then there is no point in doing an experiment.
Hans-Jörg, data migration enthusiast. Very briefly, I think on Mike's comment, I think this is useful beyond just ITIP and IMIP. We use it, for converting legacy data. And to such extent, I think it's also a very important draft because, iCalendar is like the vast IETF standard for all the legacy data of calendaring, and JA's calendar is hopefully the one of the future. So there needs to be a mapping path. As I think for Ori's question before, I think it's totally okay that these numbers are not 100%. So we use that in actual projects with actual customer data. I second the fact that most of that data which is not in here is rather, very rare properties and so on, and customers are very well happy, and there are mechanisms actually also to tell them about that, and none of these are usually crucial, but the overall mapping is very important. As for the experimental stuff, I think I agree sort of with Daniel in terms of actually the mappings we have are stable, they're not experimental. The start time is the start time and the end time is the end time. Yeah, so I totally agree that might convey a little bit of a mixed message. And I'm also happy to implement it without any in a draft status. I think people totally understand what's going on here, and that should be fine.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Right. Time-wise, we only have 5 minutes left in our session. Anything else on this? I think we have an action already, which is that you're going to start a discussion on the list.
Yes, I will start the discussion, but given the feedback now, it will not necessarily define experiment success criteria, but brings,
Just very quick idea, maybe. In HTTP working groups, they had implementation milestones where they said that, this revision is please implement, and they encourage and market it. So that's kind of a different way of trying to do what you're
But that
trying.
sounds intriguing. I will check that out.
Cool. The other item we had on the agenda was VPOL. Do we have anything to discuss on VPOL at the moment, Ken? No, nothing to discuss on VPOL. Then in our last 5 minutes, let's look at our milestones. You say that like it's scary. Submit task draft to IESG. So that sounded like it was going to be ready soon. So let's say December. Fingers crossed. Subscription upgrade document likewise has been bumped through to December, but hopefully we can get that done. Yes, am I not? Oh, I'm sorry. There we go. I clicked off fast so that I didn't get this, but there we are. Good. VPOL document. It's definitely going to be next year. When next year do you think? And we need to implement it first, right? Mike?
I'd say early. I mean, I have it almost completely implemented. I think Ken's partially implemented.
All right, so early June. It's the first half of the year.
Should be, yeah.
That just means we don't need to review it next IETF. Calendar series document. That we kind of shelved that. Are we going to try and go ahead with that, or do we let that die?
I wouldn't like to let it die. I just need to get some of these other things out of the way. Then I'll get back to it. Let's just leave it just lingering there.
All right.
Shove it on
Christmas.
a year or something.
We'll have it ready by Christmas next year. JS calendar mapping document. Robert, what are we thinking timeline on this? Yeah. All right.
Timeline depends on the decision if we go with experiment or plan it to be longer in draft status. But if it's an experiment, it might be already be ready for last call next IETF. But
yep. All right. Well, let's say we'll review it March next year and then see if we kick it down. I've adopted draft for participant mapping in ITIP with a goal of adopting it this month. And I think that's the only new work that we've added. So, you can just hit delete on that, right? And it goes away. Yes, good. And done. All right. And with that, we're done 2 minutes early. Thank you, everybody. See you at the next IETF.
Thank you. Bye-bye.